Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dorsey Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio chapter of the American Planning Association, and I am your webcast moderator. Today is Friday, April 3rd, and we will hear the presentation, Introduction to Content Engagement. For technical help during today's webcast, you can type your questions in the chat box found in the webcast toolbar to the right of your screen. For your content questions related to the presentation, again, just type those in the chat box located in your webinar toolbar. We will answer those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. Today's webcast is sponsored by the Colorado chapter of APA. So thank you, APA Colorado, for pulling this session together and being a member. Coming up on your screen is a list of our upcoming webcasts, and we have many more down the pipeline. Actually, I think we're booked out almost through the end of July right now. We're just gathering info together to get it ready for you to register. I will note this is a screenshot of our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. And here on this page is where you can just click on the title to register for the events. Up at the top, you'll see a couple tabs. If you hit the prior webcast tabs, that's where we have PDF copies of all of our previous sessions and also from years past. The distance education tab, you will see there are 2 sessions available for on-demand viewing, which means at any time this year, you can view those sessions and get CM credit. One is for law, one is for ethics, both worth the amount you need, 1.5 credits. So be sure to check those out as well. This session has been approved for 1.5 CM credits for live viewing. To log those credits, head over to planning.org, log into your MyAPA account, and from there you can either search by today's title or the event number. The event number is listed there. And if you didn't get a chance to write it down or don't remember the title, just head over to ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast, and you'll be able to get that info that you need to submit your credits. And like us on Facebook, just search Planning Webcast on Facebook and we'll pop up. There's where we'll post any important news items. If we have a cancellation or we have a new session available, we'll be posting it there. And click the red button, head over to YouTube, search Planning Webcast and subscribe to our channel. You and over 2,000 folks have subscribed. We have over 300 videos recorded from our sessions that are available. And this session also will be recorded and will be posted up on our YouTube channel. So be sure to check that out. If you have any other questions, just again, head over to ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast, and there you'll find my contact info and all the session information that you might need. So with that, I am going to turn it over to today's speakers. Chris Holler, I'm changing the presenter key over to you.
Perfect. And I think that worked out nicely. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for having us, and thank you everyone for taking the time out of your probably new and different schedule as we're all sort of navigating this new situation that we're all in. I just turned on the video real quick to say hi. We're going to turn that off for the introduction for the presentation. Just a quick word about myself. I'm the CEO and founder of Conveo. We're a communication platform for civic projects. I personally started getting interested and passionate about digital engagement going through planning school. Just around the time when the Web 2.0 started and Google Maps just came out and had an open API, and all things were wild and new and kind of, and obviously we've come sort of a long way since then. And so what we're going to talk about are some of the lessons we learned along the way, some of the different sort of things we've tried over time, and kind of we're excited to kind of talk to you about this sort of new and engaging field, and kind of pass it on to Kelly, my colleague.
All right, thanks, Chris. I'm gonna turn on my screen too. Hello, everyone. So I'm Kelly. I'm the communications manager for Conveo, and I have about 10 years of experience in the community development field. So everything that Chris and I are going to be sharing with you today comes directly from our experience. And my passion really is in community engagement, and that's what led me to choose a career in the planning field, believe it or not. and I know it can be challenging sometimes, but I enjoy helping people find solutions to those engagement challenges and helping everyone implement their vision for the future. So let's get started. All right, in our webinar today, we're going to give you an overview of what content engagement is. I realize it's a term that most people are not familiar with, so we're going to explain what it means. But first, we're going to start with why it's important, and then we'll tell you more about what we mean by the term, and we'll go into some examples of when and how to use it, and we'll open it up for questions and discussion at the end. So why do we need content engagement? Well, how many of us have had the wonderful experience of putting in a ton of work on planning for a public meeting or workshop, and then only 2 people show up? And it's the same 2 people that come to every meeting. Or, of course, in our current situation, in-person meetings are not even an option. So how can we inform people about our projects and get their feedback? And we can go to the next slide. And also, the projects that we're working on are very complex. There's no easy answers or simple solutions to things like homelessness or climate change. So, and the causes of these issues are multifaceted. The solutions are multifaceted. It can be challenging to explain the information to our colleagues, let alone residents or other types of stakeholders. Go to the next slide. So whatever solution we come up with, whether that's a plan or a policy document, requires buy-in from both internal and external stakeholders in order to be implemented, or else it just ends up sitting on the shelf if we don't get that buy-in. Next slide. So how do we get buy-in? Well, there's no simple formula for getting buy-in, but there's a few key ingredients. And first, stakeholders really need to have an understanding of the issues and the potential alternatives. If they don't have an understanding, then they're not going to be able to give meaningful or useful input. And secondly, that fundamental understanding is essential in order to receive informed feedback from our stakeholders. Instead of just, I don't like it, we can't do anything with that feedback. We want them to be able to articulate better why they don't like it. Maybe have an informed conversation about the trade-offs of different alternatives. So that's also an important component of people feeling like they were heard, when we can actually do something with their comments instead of just saying comment noted. All right, we can go to the next slide. So how do we achieve understanding and get that informed feedback? And that's where content engagement comes in. Go to the next one. So what do we mean when we say content engagement? So quite simply, it's just how viewers engage with your content. When they visit your project website, is the experience frustrating and overwhelming, or is it easy to navigate and digest? Can they quickly find the most important information that's relevant to them, or do they give up and never look at your website ever again? So, and I'll say, I don't know if it's possible for people to have as much fun as the picture on the right looking at a zoning code, but we would like to try. Go to the next slide. So here's kind of a Maslow's hierarchy of needs as it relates to interaction or consumption of information. So at the very least, on that bottom rung, our content should be functional and useful. So many of our plans, our policy documents, codes, etc., typically meet the bottom 3 rungs of being functional, reliable, usable, but where we start to run into trouble is crossing that divide and also being convenient, let alone moving up into pleasurable or meaningful. So that's what we're trying to achieve with content engagement, is getting to that top rung of this pyramid. We'll go to the next one. So I'm going to quickly walk through 3 things to consider when you're preparing for content engagement. Then the rest of the presentation will go through some ideas and inspiration for how to address these. So first off, how do we present information in a way that's both engaging and easy to understand? Then secondly, how do we collect informed feedback in a constructive way that's not overwhelming? And third, how do we keep the momentum going and ensure our plan actually gets implemented? Go to the next one. So I'll make a quick side note and say content engagement also depends on the context that we're operating in. So in terms of audience, we would explain things differently to kids than we would our colleagues or other groups of people. And then next, the setting matters, of course. Are we having an in-person meeting with poster boards and flip charts, or is someone reading through our content from their couch or their office? And then next, devices are another consideration. Is someone using a super high-end computer to read through our content, or are they reading it on their cell phone while waiting in line at the grocery store, trying to get toilet paper at 6 a.m.? Okay, and then next, I'm going to turn it over to Chris. He's going to walk us through some ideas about how and when to do content engagement.
Yeah, thanks. Great introduction. What we really want to sort of dive into this in this second part and sort of longer part of this presentation is sort of looking at sort of what has emerged over time as sort of best practices on how to put, a content engagement in place. And this is really meant sort of as an idea and as ideas and inspiration. There's no, finite set and no sort of fully defined sort of approach to this. It's really something that's emerging. It's something where we want to look at some tactics and some other sort of ideas, and again, give you something to work with that you can kind of build on. It's also something that we're still collecting, so we're going to open it up for questions later on, but we also want to know sort of what you have tried, what works, what doesn't, what other things we kind of may have overlooked. Given the short amount of time, we're going to sort of look at mainly web and online tools. I want to preface this though and point out we do think low tech is great. We think there's a great body of work and best practices around engaging people in an in-person setting with very hands-on experiences to explore. Those are, again, wonderful, I think, by our background and sort of what we've seen emerging. That's why we're focusing mostly on online and digital tools in this presentation. It's also, at least for the foreseeable immediate future, what we're stuck with as we're all kind of working from home, staying at home. We find, that this presentation actually is also a way to kind of give you some ideas on how to deal with this sort of new reality we're all in, and we're going to dive into some of those at the end too. We added a couple of additional slides that can help with, how meetings go online now. The other thing I want to sort of highlight up front, a lot of this is really rooted in what I would call user-centered design, and that's sort of a field that started, or an approach that really started in software development, but I think in the meantime has sort of really sort of spread throughout different practices and how we approach things in other fields in our daily lives. And one of the first books I read a long time ago about usability and user-centered design is called Don't Make Me Think. I love the book. It's a great book. It has had a couple of revisions by now. But I think it's still sort of the essence. And if there's one thing that I want you to take away from this, is really sort of asking that question, or looking at what you create and how you communicate through the lens of your users, of your citizens, stakeholders, constituents, whoever that might be, and thinking through whether they can actually accomplish what they're setting out to accomplish without having to think hard about it. So that's a really sort of one of the guiding, I guess, principles that we'll see. And so, as Kelly said, we're going to jump into 3 sort of main sections. First one, we're going to focus on how to make content engaging and easier to understand. And we'll look at some of the guiding kind of questions along the way. So there's going to be a few sort of subsections that we're going to look at. First one is, how am I supposed to understand this? So this idea of how do we foster understanding, where what we often see, and I'm sure this is sort of a familiar look, a lot of our documents are very text heavy. And even though, for example, zoning codes have gotten a lot more visual and include more graphics and pictures to kind of highlight what they're about, it's still generally a long couple 100-page document, very text heavy, very hard to navigate and understand. And so you'll see throughout the presentation, these little red dots are, the pieces that we're going to try to tackle and present some alternatives for. So looking at, again, this sort of very dense experience of dealing with zoning codes, there's over the years we've seen sort of some new tools come out for interactive zoning codes. Conveo is one of them that you can use. And this just sort of pulls from our experience, the lowest hanging fruits is really trying to get commentary, instructions, help text into the document. So when you look at the picture on the right, Conveo allows you to add simple pop-ups with information into the document, so you can provide, commentary. Obviously, you can change the legal language. That's just sort of what zoning codes are. But even in other documents, like a comprehensive plan or something, you could add additional information on top of that, kind of helping people understand certain concepts that they might not be familiar with. Or, looking at the example on the left, also a feature that pretty much all of the interactive zoning code tools that are out there have is an interactive glossary. So instead of having to scroll to the end of the document to find, what a certain term means that you might not be familiar with, right there, it's just something you hover over and the kind of description comes up. So simple tools to kind of start that. Another sort of very common one in the meantime are using videos to help explain certain concepts. So, on the left is an example in Albuquerque, how they created a quick intro to their zoning code and highlighted some of those concepts. So that's a professionally created video, which obviously takes a little bit of time and effort to create, but it's great to plug right into the document and kind of have people sort of watch. Another good example of that might be welcome messages by sort of a key staff person. Or on the right, you see, an example of Denver's of some neighborhood workshops here in Denver, where they recorded the session, posted it online afterwards for people to kind of dive in and kind of provide additional information online. And so, knowing that we all now have cell phones in our pockets that have great cameras, video has become a lot more approachable and a lot easier to spin up. So it's definitely something we encourage. Sort of along those lines, rich and interactive graphics obviously sort of are a great way to get information across. When you look at the two pictures on the right, those are just simple visualizations that put things into context. Numbers are easier to understand if you reflect and show, how much out of a certain amount, for example, is, how that changes maybe between different scenarios and things like that. The top example is an engagement happening on Engagement HQ, the Bang the Table tool, and it kind of includes some information in a survey and really sort of nicely puts into some visuals in place to understand what decibels are, in terms of how loud something is. And so comparing it, to a lawnmower or to a vacuum cleaner, things like that, just puts it into context. So providing context through visuals is sort of a key way to understand sort of complexity or complex issues. And then on the left is an example of a planning-related infographic. We love infographics. They've been around for a while too. It's not necessarily a new topic. Still want to highlight it just because it's a great way to, again, give people this something rich to explore, to kind of get drawn in, explore something that they're interested in, jumping to specific sections or specific areas and kind of just grappling with this and kind of going in rather than having to sort of read through something. And really sort of that interest-based approach, I think, is sort of a key thing to how infographics work and why they're great. Another, again, sort of big sort of component that we want to dissect is sort of how we present maps. Online maps have been around for a long time, obviously, and they've come a long way. I'm showing an older example here because it nicely exemplifies sort of some of the issues that we still sometimes see. So GIS is something that as a system and as a concept is not something that comes easy to understand for layman users or for citizens that had no sort of prior exposure or education around it. And so putting a GIS portal in front of them that has tons of different layers, sometimes with cryptic names, and then a toolbar with just a few plain icons that they've never seen before, and represent concepts that they've never seen before, is a really sort of user unfriendly way to get the message across. And so, to deal with that, a few kind of pointers to make that easier is, one, we find what we often see on municipal websites is that the zoning code might be posted, either in a system or as a PDF, and somebody has to, download that, read it, and then has to go scramble somewhere else to the city's GIS department's website, because that's where the access to the, to the map is. And so the two components are just very far remote from each other and require thinking, again, to kind of find the other component and then figure out what to do with this. So having them integrated where they're side by side, and either embedding the map into the document or even just sort of linking them and providing links close by is sort of a key component of making that easier and easier to access. Another kind of key component here is the providing information in context. So taking this one step further, if you, again, sort of the example of a zoning code, or, this could be a comprehensive plan with an accompanying land use map, clicking on a specific zone district, then bringing up the map that is specifically tailored to where that, where the different districts are, is sort of a key way of integrating that without having much to process much mentally, what to filter by or what to zoom in for. And so, again, this is something that's available in quite a few of those online interactive code, suites that are out there. But just looking at this, Esri's ArcGIS Online apps provide some simple tools to build these sort of filtered maps, and just sort of linking them and referencing them by their URLs and giving people sort of that information that they're looking for immediately instead of having to think about it is sort of something we find to be sort of a really good practice. Additionally, I want to sort of highlight how comparison maps really do sort of a good job of getting information across. So, look at the picture in the back or on the top. An area that we might not be familiar with, is hard to grasp how large it is. If you overlay it over an area that people are familiar with, it becomes all of a sudden easier to understand. When you look at the picture on the bottom right, I think that same sort of interface, and again, ArcGIS Online maps or apps provide some of those functionalities. Sort of having two layers that you can kind of toggle in between and kind of slide back and forth makes it much easier to compare a trend in a preferred scenario, compared to having those sort of maps either as a toggle, as a layer you can toggle on and off, or having them separately. And then taking this concept a step further, you can even use this with, maybe looking at a tactical urbanism kind of installation you had, and comparing, what the street before and after looked like. So using this with streetscapes or even with visualizations is sort of another powerful tool to kind of, again, highlight how some changes take effect and make them easier to understand. Another thing that we see that is sort of, again, sort of part of what the documents we have to produce, we understand that, but really sort of making, translating that and providing some alternatives to, getting things like density and dimensions and setbacks explained that are often hidden in tables, is using visuals. And visualizations has been around for a while, so we're going to look at some of the different aspects here. As Google Street View is obviously sort of a free and powerful resource. You could use this and embed this into your documents or into your website, simply sort of showing, for example, if you're talking about densities, just pick some areas of your city or municipality that reflect certain densities and plug them in here. People can explore them and you can have a little bit of an immersive experience kind of looking at those. Again, it's a very simple thing to offer. It's also a great tool to show existing conditions and give people an idea that might be not as familiar with certain sections of town, what this is about. Taking this one step further, 3D visualizations have been around for a long time. There's a sort of, again, a large practice around this in our field already. So this is great. A few things to highlight that have sort of recently kind of changed. One, when you look at the top right, it's a wind simulation for Singapore. So I think 3D has gotten a lot more sophisticated in terms of how it can be integrated with modeling, and using it to answer certain questions and then visualizing them. The bottom picture is an example of Gridix, a zoning hub or zonar software that allows you to, again, visualize your zoning code and sort of color code different aspects of it and make it easier to understand, again, putting those tables and other sort of hard to understand aspects into something that can be visualized and then explored in a 3D viewer. The image on the left, obviously you all know SketchUp. I think SketchUp has done a sort of really over the years led to a major shift in how approachable and easy to create 3D models are. And as such, I think that's sort of the key takeaway here. It has gotten a lot easier to publish 3D and to create 3D, and then it has gotten a lot easier to publish 3D models. There's a few firms out now and digital offerings that allow you to simply export your SketchUp into an online viewer that you can plug into your website or into other materials you're creating, and allowing people to zoom and scroll and explore them at their own time. One of the sort of big things to kind of highlight is level of detail obviously makes a big difference. So the more refined it is, the more people will latch onto certain ideas. So keep that in mind as you're creating those. But again, great way to kind of share content. And so an additional kind of, taking this one step up, one of the tools that over the last years has obviously been hyped a lot, but really sort of has also kind of shown its value in some of the projects. This is an example of work that MIG has done and won an award for, an APA award for their work in Orem, Utah around some urban design options. And so they created a 3D model that they then allowed people to explore using virtual reality headsets. So you can kind of see people gathering. It kind of highlights one of their shortcomings, right? The systems are, especially the powerful systems, are still very expensive and not very widespread. So you would have to have, an open house almost to have people come in and explore these. But again, the experience is very powerful because people can explore it at their, standing within it. So they really have an experience in it that they can feel rather than just, process on a conceptual level. And I think that's also this sort of empathy machine or empathy approach to is sort of something that I think is the real value here, is putting yourself into somebody else's shoes. So for example, you could explore a streetscape out of or a playground or something like that from the view of a child, looking at it from a lower angle. You could explore it using as somebody who's in a wheelchair. So it really gives you that again sort of experience of being in somebody else's shoes. That's very powerful and can be really sort of a game changer. And the picture on the left, you see these Google Cardboards devices where you can use cell phones to explore some of that. We've seen some examples of planners using those to make it more widely accessible. It's still a very technical process that people need help with. It's not at the level where it's intuitive enough that a large audience could kind of do this by themselves. But the hope is that we're going to get there. All right, next question. How do I find what I'm looking for? So this is really a question of approachability. How can we get the information quickly instead of having to scroll through a long document? And what we often find here, this is sort of a fairly typical kind of, after a plan gets goes through city council and gets approval, it goes somewhere on a page on the city's website. There's a link to chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. Each of those links to a separate PDF. So me as maybe somebody interested in biking or affordable housing come to this, and I'm clueless where to go to look for the information I'm looking for. So I click on chapter 1 and download it. Takes a minute or two. I scroll through the document, can't find it, close the PDF viewer, go back here, download the next document. It takes another minute or two. So you get the idea. It's a pretty tedious approach, especially if you're trying to look for something specific, which most people do. I mean, nobody reads a comprehensive plan front to back or like some master plan or something like that. There's typically, most people will look for something specific or have a specific interest that they want to explore further. So how can we make this easier to approach? One of the things we learned over the years is that really sort of structuring an interesting summary page can go a long way. So instead of just linking chapter by chapter, breaking it down by specific elements that people might be looking for, creating some visuals, creating some, again, topic-based navigations, really breaking this down almost as a, here's this summary that, 80% of the people might be interested in, and then giving them some quick and interesting or quick guidance to into those detailed sections where they find the answers that they're looking for is a great approach. Another one, this is again sort of Conveo specific, we introduced a guided tour feature. So as you kind of start getting into the document, instead of just scrolling through it, you can click, through a step of tips. So you can jump somebody from page 1 to page 25 and explain what's happening there, to page 65 and explain why this is important. So really giving them sort of a high-level overview instead of having to scroll through and kind of figure it out as you kind of skim the content. Another big one really is this sort of idea of a flexible navigation. We like the idea of giving people a choose-your-own-path kind of navigation that allows them to go into specific areas that they are interested in. So oftentimes I would recommend going and talking to the staff that answers a lot of questions about these things and ask them what those questions typically are. And so you could either have, when you look at the top, you see a question-based approach to navigation. So like some of the key questions that people have about a zoning code, you could use as main guidances and then provide some additional information about each of those. Maybe build out a guide page that kind of answers some of those and has links to more information. It could be topics, it could be mode of transportation, whatever the project is you're working on. It might be a different angle that you'll find that most people will approach this from and most people will be interested in. And so use those and provide those as quick links to kind of go in and look at details. A key aspect here, and that's actually a very common approach, and piggybacking on what I just mentioned, is this question sort of, how does this affect me or how my neighborhood? So like presenting content in a way that's relevant and makes it easy to find that answers is sort of another, I think, a key design component. And kind of one of the examples here is, we model fairly complex things, and we as planners use spreadsheets and other kind of more sophisticated tools that we have available to kind of get to those answers. The question then becomes is, how do we make that available so somebody on their own time doesn't have to figure out the formula and figure out how to calculate it, but how can we get them that information in a more intuitive fashion without having to, again, make them think. So those are just two examples of calculators we've built over the last couple of years. So one example on the left is a very simple tool that the City of Miami Beach used to help people understand the implications of a bond issue. And instead of, again, putting a spreadsheet in front of them or a formula that they have to figure out, they just plug in the taxable value of their house, and they can drag a slider throughout different years, and then they see how that would impact them in terms of how much their taxes go up each year in a very visual, kind of easy to understand manner. Again, the example on the right is for the City of Vancouver, trying to go carbon-free by 2050. We help them with a simple kind of interactive dashboard. So as you kind of drag the slider over the certain years, you see how your personal kind of energy cost will change as we're kind of moving completely to renewables, and then you see sort of how other transitions are going along the way, how certain metrics are improving, etc. So again, a kind of nice way to take that infographic approach to the next level, and then also kind of personalizing it. That personalization is really sort of a key theme through some of those. And I'm realizing, a lot of the tools I'm presenting here are, more in depth. They require a little bit more work. You might have to work with somebody on your web team to kind of get those things up. But wrapping that into a trivia is kind of a nice way. We found, this is an example from quite a while ago, but like having people put in, their information, their personal information, where they live, and maybe a few other things, and then show them how changes kind of reflect on them, and make them even guess, how that would kind of change, and then showing them, presenting it with the information afterwards on how many of those they got right and how they compare is, again, a powerful tool to play with, a play on curiosity, really, to drive people's input. And then the last thing, and this goes back to zoning codes, I'm realizing there's a few too many probably zoning code examples in this. But on the right, you see the city of LA, again, sort of finalizing their zoning code update. This is an example that Urban Insight built and also won an APA award for their sort of personalized zoning code. So you can type in your address, and by a sort of mechanism how the zoning laws and zoning regulations are kind of tagged, it spits out all the relevant information for them. Again, which gives you a personal 2 or 3 page summary of something that otherwise would require you to navigate a 600-page document, making it sort of nice and user-friendly. Example on the right is an example we helped Albuquerque with their interactive IDO, and in that case, the zoning code didn't lend themselves to do that sort of more programmatically. So it's really a step-by-step guide that helps you figure out how to find the answers in the zoning code based on your address, and then again gives you sort of a PDF export afterwards. Both of those scenarios, again, by using a personalized approach, really helps cut down the staff times in terms of answering questions. People come with to the building department with more refined questions, and instead of educating them from scratch, the idea is that they have a lot of the answers already at their fingertips, and they come with the things that they then still can't figure out, saving you a lot of process or a lot of time in the process. All right, moving on to the next section. This is really, again, in this sort of model of creating buy-in, that understanding is a key component to get feedback. It also makes your feedback more informed. And so the question is, how can we then, use these sort of new tools, and how can we approach this in a way that we get tailored feedback in a way that doesn't overwhelm? So this is really about content-based feedback, and engagement is really about structure and context. Structure in the sense that we don't get, kind of different types of feedback, and context is, making sure we understand what the feedback is about. And this is sort of the typical scenario we find still on a lot of city websites is, you need, draft reviews, or you need, you have a public review draft ready or something like that you publish, and you publish it as a PDF, and then, post maybe a survey along with it. And you also say, here's the person in charge, send them an email or call them, or show up in person. And so what happens is you get information from all different angles. They might be very different in nature, because somebody calling will leave a completely different type of response than somebody sends you a marked up Word document. And so and the challenge is, like, none of those exactly sort of what they're about, meaning they are often vague, or they might be people getting on a pedestal complaining about something, but you have to then break down and figure out what that actually relates to, that sort of longer feedback you got. And so it's really sort of, for us, a very passionate kind of thing where our work on Conveo started. It was this idea of how can we make these documents easier to reply to and to review, instead of sending PDFs out to everybody and then getting a bunch of feedback back that we can't make sense of. Let's bring everybody to the same document. Let's have people just click on the document, see what other people have said. They can kind of respond to it. They can support it or oppose comments. All of those tools to, one, foster higher quality feedback. Two, to limit, the amount of duplication you get. It really helps in terms of the, having some back and forth. People will realize that there are some trade-offs, and they'll work towards resolving those instead of you having to figure out how some conflicting comments make sense. So we find there's a lot of value in really sort of having that discussion happen on top of the document. And on top of that, you get tons of time savings by not having to scroll through the document, figure out what something relates to. And this is not really, that platform is not really just limited to actual drafts of a specific document. This could be charrette results, it could be graphics that you want feedback on, whatever that is. We find if you make it so people click into a picture or into a graphic or into scenarios, it's much better, or it increases sort of the level of understanding, and also the specificity of the type of feedback you're getting. Same goes for surveys. If you plug those into a document and maybe have 2 or 3 different surveys in a document, or even more, about specific aspects of that specific section, your results will be much better than if you post a PDF and then have a survey on the side where you don't know if somebody actually read the PDF before they filled out the survey. or what the specific survey responses then relate to. So again, a powerful tool to, or a simple tool, I should say, to kind of make that easier to understand and help you kind of make sense of it all. Graphic input is really something that I feel like there should be better tools around. It's a fascinating kind of topic, and also not that much, again, sort of ready-made tools available. The tool on the lower left is StreetMix. It's a great tool to use to facilitate conversations about, changing, like adding bike lanes, changing the dimensions of our street around, because people can kind of drag and drop different uses into this and different modes of transportation and play with an existing street width to kind of figure out how to best configure that. So again, great tool that you can use both in a meeting or with people at home. The example on the top is using a project called Block by Block it's a United Nations project that used Minecraft in with 25 different countries and youth in 25 different countries to talk about urban design. And again, it helped get kids involved. It gave them a playful way to design urban spaces that they were interested in, and it had that sketch level that provided some fun opportunities to explore different scenarios and options and have a conversation about them in a virtual environment. Again, I think there's a lot that could be done here. I wish there would be sort of additional tools I could present. Mapping, obviously sort of a big one, this example on the left. So getting map-based feedback, I think using maps to educate it, but at the same point, using that to then collect specific feedback on certain areas, whether it's areas of change, whether that's a new land use code or zoning map, presenting that information and then collecting feedback obviously raises the level of conversation and the detail that you get back. So the example on the left is Engagement HQ, their mapping tool with a GIS overlay and allowing people to draw pins on a heritage kind of engagement. The example on the right is a project we're helping the city of Billings with right now, sort of finalizing their zoning code. Kind of having a side-by-side, you can search by your address, see what the before zoning, the after zoning is. You're going to learn a little bit more that way, and then provide your comment based on what you see. And then this is probably the most fun, but also the most complex topic. And it's sort of, as planners, again, we deal with very sort of complex scenarios and complex topics. And so just having open discussion tools or surveys could lead to sort of very much sort of pie in the sky, open-ended kind of feedback, which is great early on in projects, but sort of having people dig in and do some work and kind of help give them tools to help explore the trade-offs and understand the trade-offs and realize that we can't have it all, is sort of a very powerful engagement tool. And so the tool you see on the left is Balancing Act. It's a great budget engagement tool, so you can outline either a city's budget or your project budget, and explore some of the pros and cons of each of those investments, and people can kind of play with those and say we should invest more in one, and then they realize they are in a deficit and they have to fix some of the other ones and cut spending on something else. So it helps on a budget level and have that conversation. The tool on the in the center, you're probably all familiar with, MetroQuest, is sort of a very sophisticated survey tool, but also includes some scenario-based question types. And so looking at that, it gives you, in this case, a couple of different instances and options to play with. And sort of as you kind of play with the different options, you see what that does in terms of the type of development you get. And you also see on the right some of the indicators. So how certain scenarios or combinations of a scenario helps improve certain indicators and might not, or might be lacking others. And so a great way to kind of explore that. The tool in the back is an example we did for help GDOT with, kind of along the same lines of contrasting budget allocations, but then showing how that affects different performance levels. And the last thing I want to highlight here is, it's a great thing to share, to give people access to the results, both for them to get them curious. It helps sort of guide them through it, and then it gives them a great some insight in sort of how they compare, and they can kind of explore how they might differ from everybody else and provide some context that way. And let's wrap up here with the virtual public workshops before I hand it over to Kelly for the last part of this. Really, this is a few slides we added just because all of us are now in this sort of same boat of having to figure out what to do about not being able to meet face-to-face anymore, right? That's sort of our primary mode of operation for a lot of engagement. It's in-person kickoffs are very powerful. I feel like there's sort of an official aspect to it and a face-to-face that's really important. And so what are we going to do with this, right? So the first part, and I'm sure you've all by now sort of watched some webinars and got some information about how to move your presentations online. We're experiencing one of them right now, right? There's a range of different webinar tools. We've seen sort of a few cities now start moving their city meetings, town hall, like online and present. YouTube Live and Facebook Live have capabilities of streaming, but it doesn't have as much capabilities in terms of bringing different people together to present. So in that sort of combination, one thing I just want to highlight, if you want to make sure you create processes that are as accessible as possible, there's a large part of our citizenry that might not be in a situation where they can install something like Zoom or GoToMeeting. They might also not be familiar with. So keep in mind there's a threshold or a barrier to participation if you use a webinar software. And that does not really exist with YouTube Live and Facebook Live. So those streaming options are very easily available. And therefore the link you see down in the bottom left, we put together a quick tutorial on how to actually link them. So you could still have your team come together and present using something like with a shared presenter, team of presenters, using something like a webinar, using some of the tools that it provides to kind of have some more in-person, in a sense, kind of experience as part of a webinar. But at the same point, live stream all that to YouTube and embed it somewhere else to make sure you're accessible and you don't lose people that might not have access to those kinds of tools. The next one is, how do we take some of those engagement tools that we have that might not be provided by a webinar online? So, webinars are great in terms of, giving people options to poll and to unmute people to provide feedback, but that's about the level of engagement that they give you for a large audience. So we found, using, in our case, we supported a couple of projects now using Conveo, where they, posted their poster boards and pulled that up during the workshop or during the webinar. They could kind of start adding some of their feedback on it. And those same poster boards could then be available online afterwards. Same thing, if you don't need to go there and you just want to sort of have a whiteboarding tool, even a shared document like Google Docs is oftentimes a great way to capture information. So there's different tools you can kind of piece together to replicate some of those face-to-face activities, especially when it goes to presenting content. And then, same thing for something like dot voting exercises and other engagement tools like that. We found that these sort of inline surveys and adding a survey tool to your webinar or web meeting is an effective way to replicate some of those and still, run those kinds of activities without losing that capability. And then the last thing I want to highlight is, not everything is sort of a big web meeting that's sort of, or webinar that's open to everybody. You're still sort of probably needing to engage these sort of smaller, often looser stakeholder groups, whether that's a citizen steering committee or, work group. So there's a range of different things, that I think address this. One of the things we found that makes it kind of challenging, oftentimes things like Dropbox or Microsoft Teams or Google to collaborate, they're very much sort of tailored to the needs of a department in a company where people are really committed and don't mind creating user accounts and don't mind learning a little bit to kind of figure out how they work. And so they tend to, again, sort of present a burden or a threshold that a lot of people might not get across in those settings. And so especially if you have again a looser setting in terms of stakeholders, and so giving them a space that they can easily access is sort of important. So the example on the left is again a Conveo page that is password protected with like one shared token. So it gives everybody access to all the materials that they need. They can collaborate there before the meeting and after, and they can launch into web meetings from there. again, sort of a quick way to not lose those people that might not, ultimately come on board with a more extensive approach. The other tool we just recently discovered is called Miro. That's the one on the right. It's a great sort of whiteboarding tool that allows you to kind of, again, with a smaller group of 10, 20 people, come to the same board. It even includes some basic web meeting capabilities that can be embedded. So a great way to kind of take that sort of workshop experience, especially for a smaller group of stakeholders online. And at that point, I want to turn it back over to Kelly to guide us through this last part before we open it up for questions.
All right, thanks, Chris. So now that you've done put out all this great content, you've gotten all this great feedback, how do you keep the momentum going and actually implement your plan? So it's important that your plan or your policy be a living document, not just a PDF that sits on a server somewhere. So how do you make your document a living document? And we can go first. Okay, so one way is to regularly keep your stakeholders informed about the progress you're making. And the city of Longmont, Colorado does a really good job of this with their Longmont Indicators website. This tracks the city's progress towards achieving sustainability goals over time, and any changes in different indicators, whether it's air quality, water, energy, etc., are shared with the community on a regular basis through their online dashboard. And we can go to the next one. You can also use social media to post regular updates and keep people excited about your project or your plan. And another idea is to directly ask your stakeholders to help you implement the plan. So kind of crowdsourcing their ideas and suggestions, just like you did robust community engagement and asked for people's input to create the plan, keep that community engagement going throughout the implementation stage. And then finally, gamifying the implementation by asking people to take a challenge can make it kind of fun. So for example, challenging people to conserve a certain amount of water or energy, or asking them to commit to driving less and using alternative types of transportation, things like that, can help keep it interesting. And all right, I'm sure we could go on for a lot longer. We have a lot of ideas for you, but we'll end it there today. And one thing I want to mention is that we're offering a free Conveo site to any organization who needs help with replacing their in-person events. So if you're interested in that, please visit the link there. And another thing I'll mention is that we are offering weekly office hours that anyone can sign up for at no cost, where you can call in or we can set up a web meeting with you and help you with any of your content engagement related challenges. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and send an email to officehour@conveo.com to reserve a time. And with that, I'll turn it over to Q&A.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kelly and Chris. We have a lot of questions coming in. This is great. And just a reminder, folks, if you do have a question, go ahead and type it in your questions chat box there in your GoToWebinar toolbar, and we'll see how many we can get through. The first question for both of you, what advice do you have for government entities that have specific ADA requirements for their web content?
Good question. In terms of posting information, I mean, there's, I think that shouldn't be, I would encourage everybody, it is a skill to pick up and quite a, sometimes daunting task to learn all the different things that sort of you need to keep in mind to make sure that things are ADA compliant and comply with the WCAG 2.0 or 2.1 kind of standards. I do think it's obviously sort of a necessary and important kind of task. And so whatever it is you post, just sort of make sure there's like free online tools you can use to test the content and run sort of quick tests around it. I think there's even, for PDFs, like Adobe has some tools to kind of make sure that, things are compliant. So really, I think it's a matter of both familiarizing yourself, at least with sort of the basics, like, make sure that all images have alt tags and making sure that you use header structures correctly and things like that. So that's obviously sort of a key component. And those sort of, again, the basics are not that hard to learn. And then familiarizing yourself with some of the simple testing tools that are available just to kind of run sort of quick checks on it and making sure you can get there. And getting there 100% of the way is sometimes, as I said, sort of hard and tedious, but, I think you can get without that much sort of learning and you can get to sort of close to 100 fairly quickly. And again, sort of just having a testing culture around that, I think is sort of a good approach.
Okay, thank you. And I guess what are some of these testing sites that you're referring to?
There's sort of a simple one that's called Wave. The website, I think, is wave dot. I don't know, we can probably put it as a slide at the end of the presentation or add it to the notes. So search for Wave and AIM. Like there's, I forget the exact domain, but there's a simple tool that you can kind of quickly run sort of a web page through that'll spit out some of the results and give you some quick answers. And yeah.
Wonderful. Keeping along with this ADA track here, when an entity puts, like a municipality, puts a video together as part of a hearing, is there a requirement to meet any ADA or language requirements like captions, alternative language options, things like that? Do you know, either of you?
I believe there is, and if nothing else, it should be good practice to do so. I do know that Google, if you post it on YouTube, it does have a tool that will extract text out of from it automatically. So there's some ways to do that without having to go and transcribe the whole thing and get there fairly quickly. Also something that I can't on the top of my mind sort of provide instructions for, but something that you can probably with a quick Google search find pretty quickly. Or as Kelly said, our free office hours are another way to kind of get to that. We'd be happy to provide some more information and kind of walk you through some of those things. So they're not necessarily just sort of content engagement related, but it's sort of more of a ask us anything. We're sort of all in sort of challenging times trying to figure these things out that we now have to do. And so we're here to help, and oftentimes can just sort of point you in the right direction, even if we might not have to sort of the exact answers. So keep that in mind too.
Yeah, I'll add on to that. In my experience, most cities should have some sort of ADA liaison or a go-to person that should be knowledgeable about the city's policy on that. So try to seek out that person and make sure you're following your own organization's policy on ADA compliance.
Okay, great. And that might be some of the people on the line, and they don't even know that they are. Okay, kind of keeping in the same vein, and this is a question that we hear over and over again when we're talking about the communicating in the digital world. So how do we reach people, senior citizens, low income, who may not be familiar with navigating websites or even have access to a phone or a tablet or a computer? How do we reach them?
Good question. I think that the answer I would have given sort of before we were all sort of in coronavirus, in this new sort of world, is, I think there's oftentimes no way around and to meet them where they are. So, going through, multipliers, going through people like community organizations, going through, other places where we find them, and, maybe showing up with, a laptop or a tablet. And it's hard to, some people are just not receptive to that by themselves because, of their, their personal situation, and they have more important things to sort of as part of their daily struggle that they have to kind of figure out where they might not be receptive to, whatever we're planning at the moment. And so meeting them where they are, I think, is sort of the standard answer I would have given. Given that that is actually currently not an option, I'm not 100% sure sort of what the answer is. I think generally I would have said, make sure that things are mobile friendly, because a lot of people that don't own a computer might use their phone to access online resources. is sort of a big one. But again, to making sure that they learn about a topic, you know, I think it's ultimately just sort of trying to amplify and trying to reach out as much. And as you can tell, I'm kind of thinking out loud here, but, you know, again, sort of using social media and some of the other virtual channels you already have in place and trying to use them more effectively. So, you know, rather than just blasting out a social media message, maybe you can, you know, connect through social media to some of the, you know, local organizations and communities, or local organizations that represent some of those communities, and kind of tie into, you know, their distribution lists or their followers, and kind of trying to help get them on board and amplifying that. Kelly, you have any other thoughts or ideas?
Yeah, I would echo everything that you said. And I also participated in a webinar a few weeks ago that was talking just about this topic, and there's some interesting ideas that came out of that. And one of those was to, since grocery stores and banks and things are still open, that maybe there's a way to partner with those places and be able to put up posters or flyers or things just to get the word out and inform people that way. And also, I heard on there that even a lot of low-income people still have cell phones and smartphones even. So making your content friendly or cell phone friendly, so it looks good on a cell phone, is important. And also social media, Twitter, Facebook, those kind of things. Someone with a cell phone can still have access to those. And I'm thinking of, Chris, I'm thinking of our conversation we had with Larry Schooler a few weeks ago as well, where he was talking about bringing back the cable access
Yeah.
channel and broadcasting some things on there. So maybe that's another avenue.
Yeah, good point and good question. So I think we're all learning here, so we're going to be curious. If you have some other ideas, definitely let us know. And you know, our emails are on there. We're eager to learn from you as you're kind of navigating it just as much as, you know, we're happy to kind of share what we learn in this process.
Well, speaking of navigating, I love this question. Frankly, it made me giggle at first, but then I sat and thought about it, and I'm like, you know what? It's totally true. So it says we run into the situation where people aren't familiar anymore with reading maps, given many of them use kind of turn by turn navigation nowadays. Is there a different way outside of like your Google Street View to help folks locate themselves or a project area in question, so that folks kind of really get a feel for the area and what's around the project area or where they are in relation to a project?
Good question. I like that question. You're right. It is kind of interesting
Isn't that
how
good?
Google
I mean, it's
Maps has, in a
but it's
sense, kind of
totally
destroyed
true.
our map reading senses, because nobody sits there in a car anymore and is like frantically trying to figure out how to get to where they want to go. You know, I think you mentioned, and you took part of the answer away in the sense that, you know, Google Street Views is sort of an obvious one. There is some interesting, you know, 3D photography is actually, you know, fairly affordable these days. It doesn't take very much to get sort of a 360 kind of lens. So you could even take something like that around your project area and, you know, take some pictures and allow people to kind of zoom around, you know, and explore things. So that's, you know, maybe a part of the answer. You know, I think all maps, and I think most map tools do now have the locate button that they're, you know, familiar with from Google Maps. So you can, you know, click on you know, on a button and like drop in where your GPS is, or in your, if you're on a computer, it tries to find your location. If you're not if you're not at the location where that actually helps, you know, a simple address search, making sure that the address search works correctly and drops you into it, I think is a good good way to go. The other part that I think I touched on that earlier is, you know, most maps allow you to feed in information, and this gets a little technical, but it allows you to use URL parameters to feed in a specific zoom and extend And so you could, instead of just sending people to one link that then shows a map that's like zoomed out and shows the whole planning area or whole city or region, you could add a couple of more buttons underneath, or share more links that say, explore whatever the area around the new supermarket or grocery store that we're planning. And that, URL is that same map, but it feeds in a latitude, longitude to center on the grocery store, and another zoom level that's kind of further in. So playing with some of those options and kind of, again, personalizing that or tailoring that a little bit more than to just sort of send a broad map, I think might help. So yeah, those are just sort of some things that come to mind. I'm not sure if I perfectly answered that question, but Kelly, you have anything to add?
Yeah, I was just thinking, as someone who myself is directionally challenged, I've always navigated by landmarks. So maybe adding in landmarks that everyone's familiar with on your map could be helpful. Like I used to live in Marietta, Georgia, and in the little town square, there's the Big Chicken, and everyone would use the Big Chicken to navigate. You go down to the Big Chicken and you make a right. So you go down to the Big Chicken, you make a left. So so things like that might be helpful to people like myself who don't know where north, south, east, west is, which is probably pretty bad as a planner, but or towards the mountain, away from the mountain, towards the ocean, away from the ocean. Those kind of things maybe are helpful to people.
Okay, thank you. Let's talk money. There are a lot of questions on here, folks coming from smaller communities that have a very limited budget, and particularly looking forward, have no idea what kind of budget they might have. So for some of these online options, what are we talking about for cost? What are some of the simplest, maybe the least expensive versions, where communities can kind of dip their toes in, where it just might be a one-person show? And what are some of these kind of intro options that are available?
Good question. Hard to generalize, but I think looking at it, there's sort of a lot of sort of general tools now available for low cost or free, in the sense of Google provides a suite of tools, and even SketchUp and things like that are fairly affordable or free to kind of start with. Looking at the streaming options, for example, YouTube Live is a completely free service. Zoom is a fairly low cost kind of subscription to kind of get started with. So the interesting thing is those generally, I would say, tools that are the broadest and have the largest user base are also often the lowest cost, because these they make money at scale. On the other side of the spectrum, some of those very sophisticated modeling or scenario planning tools tend to be fairly high cost, because they have a fairly limited user base. So for us personally, Conveo, we try to make it very affordable so that it even fits smaller projects. So, our two pricing tiers are, either 1,950 a year for multiple documents, or if you want the whole sort of site package, it's 3,950 a year. And as you saw, or as you're currently seeing, there's a free offer that we have. We're sort of a small firm, obviously, but we realize this is a time where we need to be there and help communities, and so it's a quick way to kind of get started for free. And we're it's currently, initially it was set to April 30th, and then working on a way to kind of extend that past it. So that's kind of trying to find and strike that middle ground, knowing that, again, sort of, I think it's this sort of challenge where we want to all of us, sort of speaking for us as a civic tech community, we want to make sure these tools are sort of as freely available as possible, but again, because of the scale and you know, that just the amount of projects you have per year, like sometimes, and obviously sort of how complex that is. Again, thinking about a modeling or simulation software that might just not be possible. So, you know, Kelly, do you have any sort of thoughts on that? I know this is kind of almost ducking the question, but it's pretty hard to kind of generalize that across different tools.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of a graphic I saw this morning on LinkedIn that compared all the different tools like Zoom or Facebook Live, YouTube Live, all those. And some of those, a lot of those are free. So maybe I'll try to find that and we can include that. We can add that to the end of our presentation. And I'm also thinking of the blog article. We have a few blog articles on the Conveyo website that have links to free resources like for creating your own graphics and creating your own interactive content. There's quite a few websites out there that are either completely free or have a free trial or some free version that you can use. So even if you're not an expert webmaster or graphic designer, you can pretty easily create your own content that looks really professional. So so I would just direct everyone to check out the Conveyo blog and look at those, and I can also provide the direct links to those articles at the end of our presentation.
Great. And you know, so a lot of these larger free programs are fairly, I guess, simple to navigate and to pick up on. But do you have any suggestions for beginner level training, probably online to make it easiest, to learn some of these 3D graphic programs? Do you find that there are tutorials, videos that tend to come along with these free versions of things, like the free version of SketchUp and things like that?
Absolutely. I think, you know, in terms of free resources, I would almost say that pretty much every tool that you know, that we talked about today will have some sort of tutorial online. And especially, you know, things that are as popular as SketchUp has tons of, you know, a user community around them that typically provides free trainings that you can find on YouTube. So, you know, generally you go into YouTube and just sort of doing a search for that tool and maybe, you know, the word tutorial behind it or something like that will surface quite a bit of resources. So that's a good first step to kind of look for something. You know, a step beyond that, that's still fairly affordable is, you know, Planetizen has a range of courses, and they do have a fair amount of, you know, hour-long or multiple hour-long classes that you can take. I believe some even for credit that allow you to learn some of those tools by somebody who's very proficient in it. So I know, for example, that SketchUp example I pulled up, the guy behind it, Chase Mullen, has, you know, a series of presentations or classes on Planetizen. So that's another great way to kind of get in there. Yeah, so I would say for pretty much everything you'll find you know, low-cost options, or, you know, a couple of classes on platforms like you know, Planetizen, or what are some of the other sort of big classes, online tutorial or class sites. I'm blanking right now, but yeah.
All right, thank you. Next question, and perhaps you can add this to the list of sites and links and things at the end of this presentation. But a couple people were asking again the name of the software for the whiteboarding, the online, or the app, I guess, of the whiteboarding tool.
It's called Miro, M-I-R-O, and I think it's just Miro.com.
Okay, great. Another question. Let's see here. Here we go. What are some tips that you can provide to new users of video conferencing, especially those that are needing to give presentations that include display of graphics, things like that? And at least from my perspective, when I do these webcasts, each week. I know because I have no idea if people have ever done anything like this, been a presenter on a webcast. We always do a quick training ahead of time that I think is super helpful, instead of just trying to go into it blindly. But Kelly or Chris, do you have any comments or suggestions on how to help out those folks that are going to be venturing into video conferencing for the first time?
Good question. I think we're all in this sort of interesting new world together, in the sense that I was watching my son's teachers yesterday talk about how they just had to learn how to do remote learning now, and had to learn how to use Zoom. So I think without going too much into detail here, you already mentioned a lot of the be prepared and kind of try to figure out, do a dry run. And explore the different features of that the platform that you choose provides. And it's much easier than you would think once you get in there. It's not. It might look daunting to begin with, but once you get around, get flexible, or to play with it and get familiar with it, I think it becomes pretty easy to navigate. And just to kind of extend on that, just looking on LinkedIn, there's a ton of resources now of people sharing information on how to best facilitate workshops and how to set them up. Technically, we've mentioned sort of the link we had in terms of the tutorial and how to, plug the different pieces kind of, or integrate the different pieces. So, either a quick search or a quick kind of just looking at, as I mentioned, sort of LinkedIn might be all you need to kind of, participate in a webinar where people provide training in those areas. And again, I might refer you to the office hour kind of idea. We'd be happy to kind of schedule something and look at sort of your specific needs of what you have in mind. Because again, I wonder if the one aspect of the question that I'm skipping over was sort of the presenting content. Obviously, sort of content presentation is sort of part of the screen sharing. So whatever you can pull up on your screen is sort of how you would present it. So that might mean, it might be a PowerPoint presentation. And if PowerPoint's not the right tool, maybe it's a Prezi, or maybe it's maybe you're just using, I don't know, some other, pulling up a whiteboard, something like Google Docs to kind of capture notes. So it really sort of depends a little bit on what you want to get out of it. And again, if you like, we'd be happy to kind of help you brainstorm that or point you in the right direction. And again, I think there's tons of resources out right now, because you're sort of in good company. There's a lot of people right now that are kind of getting into that. Kelly, you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would echo that. There's so many people offering free trainings and webinars right now on exactly that topic. So I would just look on LinkedIn and do a search for virtual facilitation training or something like that, and you can find some really useful tools on there.
We'll include a link. We'll sort of add a slide or two with links afterwards. There is a resource that a facilitator shared with us recently that has access to a bunch of different kind of additional resources, trainings, materials, etc., that capture all that, and it's just sort of a resource document that might be good to share.
Thank you. This is an interesting question. With the open and public nature of inline comments, have you experienced needing to moderate or police the feedback?
Good question. So, specifically for our tool, Conveo, what we see, we do have a few steps of, controls built into the spam filter. There's, a swear word filter. You can kind of monitor things that are coming in. You could even, pre-screen kind of comments. And so we really haven't seen as much, or really sort of have communities have issues with that, because it tends to be, the conversation tends to be a lot more focused and therefore more civil than sort of an open-ended comment form. That's just, again, sort of anecdotally and just sort of high-level feedback. I think in general, there'll probably always be somebody who kind of misses the mark in terms of how they respond. And, I'm sure that some of our facilitators have had to, so not on our staff, like facilitation happens typically on the client side, and I had to unpublish something. But it's pretty rare, I want to say. It's not to the point where we even see people kind of do the pre-screening. And it's not as obvious either, because oftentimes they're slightly hidden. You would have to kind of look at a specific comment to kind of see it, so it doesn't jump out at you right away, as in a YouTube comment that where the latest comment shows up right on the top. So, we found the conversation to be generally more productive and on point than, in some of the other more open formats is sort of the general answer I would provide to that.
All right, thank you. Next question. Some of these online video conferencing options like Zoom or even, GoToWebinar, or I know that there's some Google options out there, and there are free versions of a lot of these. I've read recently that there are some safety and privacy issues, particularly with free versions of things. I read an article recently about Zoom. I don't know how true it is, that if you utilize the free version of Zoom, that Zoom has the right to listen in, to copy what you have up on your screen. Have either of you heard of any of this? Should planners be cognizant of some of the programs in which they use to make sure that their system isn't being infiltrated, or people aren't listening in, anything like that? Have you heard any of these things, or should we be wary of some things that are free?
It's interesting because I think the article you might be mentioning, I saw this morning and I filed it away to read later. So it was about Zoom specifically, and that there was some way that by the nature of it being open, people could sort of log in and share hate
Right.
speech.
Yeah.
I think the point you're mentioning, I think a lot of these tools are free for smaller audiences and then charge you based on the audience. So with that, the web meeting tools are oftentimes free. The webinar is usually capped, and then would sort of go into, you would have to pay for larger audiences. I think the same way that we're using facilitation tools here, and everybody's muted and sort of by default and can't unmute themselves until we allow it. So I think it's some of those features that allow you to at least prevent some of that or shut it down if it happens. So basically, by I'm realizing, as I'm saying this, the free versions might not give you all the tools you need to lock that down. I think the same as, again, our teacher, I'm referencing back to the conversation we had last night. They're like, well, we've added a password to our, learning space because we want to make sure only our students get in and not everybody else. So again, I'm not 100% familiar at this point if that's a standard feature that they offer in the free version too, or if that's part of a paid version or an educational license that they have. So I think it depends a little bit on the details, but it's a valid point. And just like you, I think I'm sort of, at least personally, in the same boat. I want to, I filed it away, but I want to learn more about this and see how they took advantage of that, and what the tools are, and how much that affects cost ultimately, to make sure you have the tools to avoid that or to deal with it, right? Like, I mean, in a sense, I talked recently, this is a tangent a little bit, to somebody about using a telephone town hall, and they were kind of interesting in the sense that they said, the nice thing about telephone town halls is you can talk to people beforehand before you let them go live, and you realize whether they're actually getting ready to getting on their pedestal and starting a rant, and you could ultimately disallow them to participate without anybody realizing. So you don't have that kind of pre-screening ability in a web meeting where somebody can, once you unmute them, can again start the virtual screaming, I guess. But compared to a in-person meeting, you do have, where somebody or a group might hijack the meeting, you do have a lot more fine-grained controls over that type of hijacking. Again, by being able to mute them again and force them to be muted, and being able to explain to the rest of the audience what happened and why you don't, why that's against the ground rules, and so respond to that without being, overshadowed by it, as you would be in an in-person meeting. Sorry, I went a little bit on a rant here, but All that to
No,
say, I think we're
course.
all in this boat of having to figure this out as we're kind of navigating this new landscape.
Sure. Kelly, do you have anything to add?
I think the only thing I would add to that is just any software you're considering using, just run it through your IT department, assuming you work somewhere that has a IT department, and make sure they're okay with you using that and they can, monitor it for any issues.
Absolutely. Okay. I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up here. Chris and Kelly, do you have any final comments that you would like to share? I know you're going to put some links up and send me a final slide. And for everyone, just as reference, we will have a copy of this presentation available on our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. We'll have a PDF of this, and we are recording the session, and it will be available on our YouTube channel. Just search Planning Webcast on YouTube. So with that, Kelly, Chris, do you have any final comments to share before we close out for the day?
No, just a big thank you for having us. Thanks everybody for listening. Please feel free to pick us or to take us up on our offer to have a chat, an office hour, to learn from each other. We're just as much sort of in this situation, trying to learn as much as we can in this sort of new situation, and want to hear how you're doing, and hope to be able to share some of our experiences and continue this conversation. So thank you very much.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thank you everyone for giving us your time and attention today, and we look forward to continuing the conversation with everyone.
Great. Thank you, Chris and Kelly, and thank you to the Colorado chapter of APA for hosting today. Everyone, have a great weekend, stay safe, and we'll talk next time.